Hi there. Welcome to the Right Here, Right Now live show. This show has one simple question. What's on your heart and mind right here, right now in this moment? We explore the depths and breadths of our humanity through that one simple question over the course of 30 to 45 minutes. I hope that you'll join us. I hope you'll enjoy the exploration. And this tune was created for me personally by the incredible Peter Griffiths, one half of the amazing Mind Takeaway. Do let us know what you think. Let us know what you take away. And of course, we always welcome challenges too. Hope to see you on the exploration. Hello, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are on this blue orb. Good to see you. Gary Turner here, your host of the show today. And I'm going to be bringing my guest for today, who is one of my teachers and someone that I've learnt so much from in the last 9 months. Let me just bring her on rather than just talk about her because she's here. Hello, Heather. Welcome to the
Hi,
show.
Karen. Yeah, thank you for having me. Pleasure.
Oh, well, thank you for sparing some of your valuable time to come and join me today. Um, as you know, the spirit of the show is quite intuitive. We go from that one question. So I'd love for you to introduce a bit more about the work that you do. So maybe if you wouldn't mind just doing that to start, and then I'll ask, and then share a little bit about what's on your heart and mind at the moment towards the end. That would be wonderful.
Great. I'm from the United States, and my father is Colombian, mestizo, and he met my mom when he emigrated to the US, and she's white European heritage colonizer, 1600s from Norfolk. So I've got mixed heritage. In 2003, I moved to the UK, and I was there for 17 years and left in 2020 to Colombia, where I am now. My background has been teaching economics at universities in New York and working for an AIDS organization in New York. And in the UK, I was working as the Education for Sustainable Development project coordinator for the Higher Education Academy. And then as well founded a transition town, a refugee asylum seeker organization in Lincolnshire, and was a trainer with Extinction Rebellion and communications coordinator with Deep Adaptation Forum. And now I focus on trying to bridge the gap between kind of the white Western middle class way of thinking and patterns to getting us to where we can really listen with real authenticity to people in the global South, the people who benefit least from the system that we're in. So not just people in the global South, but people in prisons, people without homes, people targeted by racism in our own societies. And so trying to make that discomfort as comfortable as possible in the sense of creating spaces for people to explore this in a way where they're not caught up in shame and guilt, and instead try to cultivate an attitude of curiosity and humility about that there's so much that we don't know. And we know that but what we do know is that everything that's been happening up until now in the West hasn't been healthy for anybody or anything on this planet. And so it's how do we not try to solve the problems, respond to the problems in a way that just makes them worse? Because that's the real danger.
Thank you for sharing that. You've shared a lot about your work. I'm wondering how that weaves into what's specifically on your heart and mind in this moment as we go live, Heather.
So I just got off another call, and I'm thinking about young people and young Western people, particularly white people probably, and how there's a lot of evidence that says that they're feeling depressed about the future, about climate change. There was some sense of hope when Fridays for Future was getting up and running with Greta Thunberg and the, like just this kind of youth uprising. And I think that felt hopeful for young people. And then they ran into the reality of the way the systems work and the protection of wealth and power around the world. And so I'm very worried about the effect that it's having on them from what I've been reading. And so I'm thinking about how to approach that, because I think it is an issue of perspective, and that the adults do have a responsibility not to put pressure on young people in a way that isn't gonna help us. Like to have more of us feeling anxious isn't gonna bring out our best thinking. And I think our best thinking will only come from when we're feeling really connected with one another and settled in ourselves. And if we're out feeling all this anxiety and we don't know what to do, and this focus on reducing everything to something like emissions, climate reductionism, which can lead to the far right and ecofascism, and having solutions that definitely don't work for everyone and that are very dangerous. I think that if we don't kind of grapple with taking care of our nervous systems when we're trying to grapple with these what are called wicked problems, these very complex problems, then we're just going to make things worse for ourselves and for everybody else.
There's so many angles I'd like to go from there, Heather, in a way. And first of all, I want to say thank you for your guidance for me over the last several months since we connected, because for anyone that's watching this live or may watch or listen to this back, what Heather's really helped me with as someone that not everybody remembers, that I still work within the centre of the global extractivist system, within chemicals, within extraction. And I've really wrestled for a few years around, do I get out of that so I can throw mud from the outside and tell them how crap they are, which I understand, or do I try and wave the flag from inside the system to say there's another way? And I'm finding, Heather, that with your support and understanding the patterns, that it makes more sense for me, as painful as it is at times, to try and wave the flag from inside. And that's an interesting journey in and of itself, because I've gone through that shame. I still pop into the who am I, or that very reductive thinking of what's the point, I'm just one person, no one's listening to me, etc., etc. And I'm finding that with your support around spotting these patterns, I find that's quite helpful for resetting the system a little bit and going, oh, Gary, you're just having binary thinking for a minute. Okay, that's going to pass. Okay, what next? Are you finding at all that those, seeing these patterns is almost like a reset? Do you see that with other people or within yourself?
Yeah, with an organization I work with in the UK, they were just this morning thinking, how do we introduce like the racism agenda without it being tokenistic? And I said, what about introducing the patterns first? The 18 white supremacy culture patterns that Tima Okun has described and has a website, whitesupremacyculture.info, I think is her website. Because it does give you a language to use and a kind of framing from which to do the self-reflection that you're talking about. And also, if you introduce it to other people, like in your company, it creates a common grounding from which to talk about extractivism, for example, because you're able to say that, you know, we've only done things one way, we're not open to hearing other ways of doing things. And so it shows that we have a common education, a common culture, this white supremacy culture, and you don't have to call it white supremacy culture. It can be common organizational cultural patterns. You know, you can say it like that, but once people see the actual list of characteristics, they'll say, yeah, I've got that. School has that, society has that, my relationships have that. And then you start to see. So it brings everyone into a shared space and understanding, because we can say, look, we've all been well trained in this. You know, it's not our fault. This is the culture that we've been raised in. And by naming it, it creates a space so that you name it, and then you can say, oh, well, if it's a thing that's not innate, then it means we can actually change it. And then you can start to bring in the other ideas that are more challenging for people. So by starting from a place that's quite, look, we're all in this culture, let's name what we see, then you can say to your colleagues, I'm doing that perfectionism thing, aren't I? You know, and someone else can say, that's binary thinking, isn't it? You know, so it creates, you know, this common ground. So, yeah, I think the patterns are a really powerful way in to a lot of this work, whether it's decolonization or racism or climate change, to be able to name what's kind of got us into this problem, this mess, this wicked place.
It's really curious, Heather, for me, because one of the things I find personally most challenging is almost the weaving of these different patterns. So I look at it, so for example, myself, right? I'm paid well in the West, all the trappings of a Western corporate life, yet I know exactly where we're going because of support of you and Sam and other people. So I know the challenges, where we are now and where we're going. And then you put in the complexity that you have kids and you have a family, and then you're like, but you want to be more activist, but then you worry about upsetting their comfort, even though you're not worried so much about your own. And then there's all these little spirals of weaves of thinking that then kick in around these various different patterns. So I was really wondering, if I take the role of a oil CEO right now that you would love somehow to be in this dialogue, in this moment, what would your invitation be to them if they were like, imagine I'm not Gary but I'm big, BP CEO, and I'm going, I know there's a problem, I know we can't carry on the way we are, but how the heck do I even start to name something different when I'm paid on a short-term basis by the financial markets? I've got a family I worry about. You know, what would your maybe invitation or sort of carrot to them be to try and get curious somehow?
Yeah, I think to start with would be to offer that space where you, that person, could name all the tensions going on. Because I think we avoid that a lot. You know, we like, it's overwhelming, so we avoid it. So we say, I gotta get, I've got this lifestyle, these expectations about me. I have to keep this job. I have to do this, that, the other. And so then they just plow through it. But if we can say, notice what it means when we have to do this, just notice like how horrible the options are, how difficult it is to balance all these competing interests, and notice how it makes us feel to be sacrificing one thing for another thing and having to decide between these things. Some of these things are structural, they're systemic, that society is set up in a particular way that, creates this. So I think first, allowing people to take the time to name it and then mourn what needs to be mourned about the situation. Like, why do we live in a world where I have to choose between the health of the ecosystems and living beings on this planet and feeling a sense of self-worth and being able to pay for what a particular lifestyle that's expected of me by my peers, by my family? Just feel it.
So thank you for that. I'm really feeling it as you share that invitation, and I think it's a really generous one, right? Because I think if I look at my own personal journey, it was only 7 years ago at the age of 38, Heather, that I started truly feeling. After adolescent bullying, suppressed, I phrase it as, I didn't have the emotional literacy to say, help me, I'm in pain, or I don't know how to say, that really hurt and I need some support with this. Like, just didn't have those words, Heather. Didn't know how to even say help. Been so conditioned to conform and accept and comply, right? And I think what I see, particularly within my industry, and I'm being a bit biased to that because it's one of the ones that, with more of your love and care and space holding, I think could transform actually quite quickly, to be honest. And I'm putting out a bit of a seed into the universe right now that, like, I can imagine Heather holding space with like the top 50 oil companies around the world, CEOs, but you could imagine that though, couldn't you? You could imagine the release, Heather, in this moment of all of those stories and narratives and fears and anxieties, if they were all together in a room with you, allowing them to go. I can imagine what that would feel like.
Well, the problem is they would be worrying about what the other men thought of them in the room. There's so much male oppression. Society is really good at oppressing men, like the expectations on men and the way that in our society boys are raised not to cry, to appear to be strong, to just a lack of emotional intelligence, because it's so suppressed. The idea that men are expected to go out and fight in wars, we take that for granted. But if we think about it in human terms, we are saying that a certain group of humans should give up their lives for another group of humans. And there's going to be an internalized depression about that for men, where they think my life is not worth as much as a man. And that seems counterintuitive because there's a lot of sexism and male domination where it feels like men, and they do, get more airtime, get more space, get paid better, etc., etc. So it's this horrible paradox. Except that if you see the way the male domination plays out, it's coming from that deep hurt of not being able to be fully human, from the time that they're gendered as being male. And then the expectations of a boy, of a man. And there are men that can't cry because they were, it was taught out of them or beat out of them, or, that you're not supposed to cry as a man. And so they can't, even if they want to, they just can't. And this means there's like pent up tension and stress. And how does it show up in the world? And so, having a group of these CEOs wouldn't be enough, because they just would not be able to show vulnerability, possibly to themselves sometimes, but especially in front of other men. That would be really tough. So I don't think the kind of system change we need is necessarily going to come from trying to change the system in the way of like a company part of this extractive industry. However, what I think, and I think I've said this to you before, is that it's all about relationships. And if we want to make changes, it's going to come from our circles of influence and who we're in relationship with. And you happen to be, and it's just happens to be where you are in like chemical industry company. But these are humans that you're working with. And it just happens to be in a particular workplace setting. Mm-hmm. And so you're taking advantage of who's around you to connect with them, have these relationships, support them in these, these tensions, and try and bring them along, into a place where they can think more clearly. And it might mean leaving their job, but that isn't the goal isn't to be in a particular job or not. The goal is to be in relationship with people so that we can learn how to take care of one another in a time where, we're going to need to more and more, we need to get better and better at this. And we're so bad at taking care of one another in our culture. But there are other people who haven't benefited from the system as much as we have, who've had to learn how to take care of one another despite the system. And if we can learn from other people and be in relationship with them and be close to them, and then we won't be so scared about losing the system. Because I think one of the patterns, the 18 patterns, is fear. And we're very afraid of what life would be like if we didn't have this same destructive, extractive, exploitative system, because we can't imagine anything different. But that's because we benefit so much from it.
God, so powerful, Heather. I just see this real powerful link between that imagination and curiosity. How can we reimagine or really look past where we are if we're just reacting to the status quo and not challenging or thinking differently, right? There seems to be a very close interplay between curiosity and imagination somehow.
Yeah, and we don't need to take the whole kind of to know this superiority, the white Western superiority that might say we have to come up with something better. Instead, we can have the humility and curiosity to see what's already out there that's being done. Because I think we're kind of desperate to be the innovators and leading edge, all of that. And instead, we want to say, where's this coming from that I feel like I have to be, out there, when really I need to, because of my own cultural upbringing, I need to learn to listen and to let go of the false security that we think we have. When, honestly, if we do create that space where people can name the tensions, people aren't secure. People don't feel secure, especially in the UK climate right now. Like, there's a lot of insecurity. So it's false. We do there's a lot of pretense around, I want to hold on to this because I need the security, when it's not offering us any security. But we're not in a kind of state of mind where we can really connect with people who are doing it in a different way.
It's really funny. I was speaking with my wife. I think it's last week, Heather, and we were having a little bit of levity in amongst the rather deep conversation we were having, and we were just laughing. I was laughing at the fact that, like, that perceived security, that perceived comfort, which again is another pattern, right? That right to comfort is. We were explaining that, even there's, with all due respect, if someone came over tonight and just dropped a bomb on our house, it's all gone. We can't control that. Like, hope it doesn't happen, but really that perceived idea that everything's stable and static and will never change is really it's a very painful misconception, actually, because there's an awful lot of our potential and our innovation and our humanity, I think, wrapped up in that belief system that thing is fixed and that it will always be there somehow.
Yeah. That sense of we're so busy trying to hold on to what we think is giving us that security that we're not relaxed. We're not able to think outside the box or think creatively, because there's this anxiety, there's a tension in what we're doing. Whereas if suddenly you were somewhere and you had no belongings, and you were just free from having to protect everything, and it was just, what ideas do you have, about something, or listen to these other people talk about something, you would listen in a completely different way, because it wouldn't be through this framing of, okay, but I have a mortgage. Like, how do I do that and pay the mortgage? And if I sell the house and say, oh, we're going to downsize, or we're going to whatever, it's going to upset the wife and kids because they want to keep, things a certain way. The neighborhood, we've got relationships with the neighbors, maybe, like, there's all the school, all of that. And if you're weighing all that, in terms of security, obviously in terms of relationships, it's great to have relationships with neighbors and friends at school and everything. But if you're thinking of it in terms of fear and insecurity, then we're not going to be open to, like, just completely radical change, no matter how radical we think we're being, because we could say radical change as long as I can keep my house and my Starbucks, or, whatever. It's like radical within these boundaries.
God, it speaks so much. I feel like it's a wet fish that you're giving me a slap with, Heather, in the most loving way, because it's part of my last 2 years, interestingly, and I'm still at the same company, as you know, have been for a number of years. Very happy with my immediate team. Like, so that whole Western life, so it's actually pretty good. Like, got a great team, great people. But one of my biggest challenges the last 2 years has actually been a lot of what we've spoken about so far, which is if I show up fully as Gary with an idea, learning out loud, sharing that I've learned about these culture patterns within myself publicly, what will happen if my employer sees it? Or what if my line manager sees it? Or what if corporate legal doesn't like it? There's always a story you can be telling yourself about why you shouldn't do something. But why I want to share this is I remember a conversation 18 months ago where there was a certain person in my organisation that said, Gary, do you want to calm it down on LinkedIn because certain people are noticing within the business? So that was their fear projected onto me about their situation if I continued to post more openly and more humanly as Gary. 18 months down the line, nobody says anything. I'm still in the same job. I'm still having better conversations. I'm probably driving more small nudges of change because I've had that let go a little bit of those stories and their projections onto me, Heather, as to what I should do because of their fear. I think a lot of the time we don't realise the taking on of other people's fears is something that's quite insidious, actually, I think, sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're not all in a privileged position to be able to say, wow, if they want to fire me, let them fire me. Absolutely. I have been in that position where I was able to say, fire me if you want to, but I'm going to keep naming the white supremacy culture patterns. And I did get fired. And that's okay, because that's that happening happens to be one of the reasons I'm doing what I do now, because of what I learned from that organization and the responses that I received. So, but I was in a position, where I could afford to be fired. There are people who, particularly people of color, that, try to interrupt racism, get fired. They don't all have backup, to be able to take that kind of risk. So it is those of us who aren't targeted by racism, for example, can do more of the interrupting of these white supremacy culture patterns. But we can do it strategically. We don't have to go in and try to get fired, but we can go in and be clear and be, do the kind of education in a compassionate way, where we're not blaming and shaming, and be ready to be fired if necessary, which is a scary, thought for so many people. But, if we want to be good allies, we do need to take risks like that. But it's part of a wider, the wider patterns, which is holding everyone back, everyone in your company that's falling, that is, they've all been raised or trained into these cultural patterns, which is why the organization can function as it does, because it's conforming, to these patterns. And yet we know that we're in a huge, huge mess on the planet. And those patterns are getting in the way of our being able to respond appropriately to what's happening, because your company's full of creative, intelligent humans. And if they were allowed to put their mind to it, the world would be a different place.
Stunning reflection, Heather. I can't believe we are 33 minutes in already. That's flow state for you.
Mm.
I want to honour your time because I like to keep these to 30 to 40 minutes. So I'd like just to maybe invite you to, for anybody that's still with us, watches this back or listens to this back when it goes onto a podcast, what's the best way for people to reach you? You know, maybe tell us a little bit about how you do work with people, just in case someone does get curious. It'd be lovely for you to share that.
So, like I do with you, can do some coaching, one-to-one with people, just exploring whatever they want to explore that piques their interest. I have YouTube videos, so my YouTube channel, Kjuzi, has things around activism and climate change, but also about the white supremacy culture patterns, being an ally, decolonization, fascism, things like that. And my website, kjuzi.org, has links to that and to writing and podcasts. But you can connect with me on LinkedIn as well, and I'll connect back with you, and then you can let me know what you need. And I work with organizations facilitating trainings around racism, equality, diversity, inclusion, racism, all that. So I'm quite open to things, although being in Colombia, I prefer things that happen in the afternoon UK time or the evening, so I don't have to get up at 3 a.m. or something like that.
Thank you for sharing that. And I just want to say thank you and just acknowledge the work you're doing, because I think you really embody and share the perfect invitation. This big, like you say, wicked problems, very challenging, a lot of stuff we don't even realise is going on, but from a place of real care and desire to heal, almost, in a way, and I think that's a really incredible space that you're navigating and holding for people, including myself, when we work together. So I just wanted to say thank you for that, Heather.
Thank you, Gary, for inviting me on. It's been lovely to chat with you.
Thanks a lot. Do check out Heather's website again. It's kjuzi.org. I'll just pop up Heather's LinkedIn again, so in case you're still with us. And I wish you all a good day. Get curious. I think the last thing I want to leave is one of the things that helped me the most with working with Heather as well, is that the phrase white supremacy culture patterns is a real terrifying phrase for most people who haven't been in this space at all. Which is why I love how Heather reframes it. She shared earlier today, just culture patterns, whatever allows us to access it, but don't be afraid of it. It's probably the last point I wanted to make, Heather, is don't let the title turn people off.
Perfect. Yeah, nicely done.
So thanks, everyone. Thank you, Heather, and we'll speak again soon.